Continuing with Revelation's message to the 7 churches, and having seen the prophetic implications of Ephesus, we're going to explore the sad events associated with the Church of Smyrna and its prophetic impact for today's believers.
To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, "The first and the last, who was dead and has come to life, says these things."
As with Ephesus, the descriptions of Jesus originate from the same descriptions given of him in chapter 1. He reminds them that I am the first and the last, and identifies with them with the words, who died and came back to life. Speak about association, as many Christians in Smyrna were being persecuted for their faith, often jailed, beaten, and in certain periods murdered on a mass scale. There is a stark contrast of believers in Smyrna to the many unbelievers, and both operated in extremes. Believers saw Jesus as the crown of life, the great reward, and worthy of being worshipped, while the many unbelievers heralded their city as the crown of Asia and their emperor as being worthy of worship. The city of Smyrna was a beautiful, wealthy city where science and medical education flourished. Today it is embedded within the modern-day city of Izmir in Turkey, which is about 60 kilometers or 35 miles from the ruins of ancient Ephesus. It is estimated that approximately 200,000 people lived in the city in the 1st century, which was a huge number in those days. In the year 23, just before Jesus' ministry, it became the center of emperor worship, as permission was granted for this city to be the first to build a temple in honor of Emperor Tiberius. Since the city frequently allied with Rome at various points in history, it was given special privileges as a free city. When Emperor Domitian took to the throne, he enforced ritual worship of himself. Everybody who refused to confess Caesar as Lord was summarily executed. Many Christians refused to take part in these rituals, and as a result were persecuted and slaughtered within the city's walls. Other than this letter, we do not know exactly the origins of how this church came into existence. The message is the shortest of all the letters to the 7 churches, and the first of 2 in which Jesus finds no flaws or criticisms. The name Smyrna means the city of life, but sadly for Christians, it is associated with persecution and death.
"I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews, and they are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of the things which you are about to suffer. Look, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have oppression for 10 days.
In their praise, the congregation of Smyrna received 4 special acknowledgments for their faithful service to Christ. Jesus knows their tribulation, which is the Greek word thalipsis, which is often translated also as afflicted or persecuted. He also knows that although they are entrenched in steep poverty, they are rich in the eyes of God for their faithful practice in a very liberal city. A relevant scriptural backdrop in support of this assertion is recorded in the Epistle of James, where he posed a rhetorical question. Has God not chosen the poor of the world to be rich in faith and the heirs in his kingdom? Scholars suggest that their poverty was likely due to their economic restrictions and sanctions imposed on them due to their refusal to participate in imperial worship. Their third positive trait is one of endurance in the midst of blasphemy by others. At the heart of their suffering are those who declare themselves as being Jews, yet are not, and are likened to the synagogue of Satan. Now, of all the Asian cities mentioned in Revelation, Smyrna had the largest population of Jews. They were extremely wealthy and very influential. It is believed that these Jews, who were also opposed to imperial worship, targeted the Christian congregation with their influence over the leaders of the city. Many believe they did this to avoid their own persecution. Lastly, their suffering for their faith is acknowledged. As a result, many Christians lost their possessions, were beaten, tortured, and often imprisoned. While the Jews who caused this may be of the seed of Abraham, their treachery revealed that they were merely pawns used by Satan to bring about the destruction of the Christians in Smyrna. Now, considering the 10 days of suffering mentioned by John, there is no record of 10 literal days of persecution in Smyrna. Having said this, record keeping relating to these churches are very limited. As a result, some scholars spiritualize the application of the 10 days, suggesting that it indicates a relatively short period of time in comparison to the other time periods mentioned in Revelation. Since all symbols are figurative descriptions that reflect literal events, many futurists believe that these 10 days refer to 10 specific periods of persecution. The Greek word hemera literally means the distance between night and day, but if used in a figurative sense, it means a period of time. The case for interpreting these 10 days as 10 waves of persecution is further strengthened as two leading and famous Christian leaders, Polycarp and Pioneers, both originated from the Church of Smyrna, but yet were both martyred during different periods of persecution. Polycarp was killed between 155 and 167 AD, while Pioneers was killed during the reign of Emperor Decius between 249 and 251 AD, close to a century apart. Fox's Book of Martyrs is one historical book which documents 10 periods of persecution faced by Christians. Out of 249 years of imperial reign, 10 periods of persecution are historically readily identified, commencing with Nero's persecution of Christians in the year 64 and ending with the Edict of Milan, established by Constantine the Great in the year 313. This edict brought an official end to all Christian persecution within the Roman provinces. Now, these 10 periods of persecution are generally assigned to the following emperors. Nero from 64 to 68 AD. The second period was in Domitian's reign from 90 to 96 AD. Trajan then from 108 to 117. Marcus Aurelius from 161 to 180 AD. Severus from 200 to 211. Maximinius from 235 to 237 AD. Decius from 250 to 253 AD. Valerian from 257 to 260. Aurelian from 270 to 275 AD. And lastly, Diocletian, who elected a senior co-emperor of the West, Maximian and Galerius, which effectively persecuted Christians from 286 to 311 AD. When we examine it closer, in 64 AD, Emperor Nero, in a potential suicidal rage, ordered his guards to set fire to Rome, declaring that he wished the destruction of all things before his death. Evidently, he did not commit suicide, and with the large loss of life and property sustained by the Roman citizens, he blamed Christians, causing the first scene of Christian persecution. Methods of his torturing madness are well documented and included dressing Christians in skins of wild beasts, allowing dogs to attack them to a point where they were mauled to death. Other Christians were dressed in shirts, stiffened in wax, and set alight to serve as torches in his palace garden. Of significance during his reign, the Apostle Paul is believed to be beheaded, while the Apostle Peter was crucified upside down. The second period of persecution occurred in the latter part of Emperor Domitian's reign, which, according to the early church fathers, John was first boiled in oil before being banished to the Isle of Patmos. Emperor Domitian then established a tribunal of imperial worship, and anyone who either refused to proclaim the oath, together with those who professed to be Christians, was sentenced to death. Less than 8 years later, Trajan was enthroned and a third wave of persecution commenced. Many Christians were persecuted and placed in prison. The most notable death during Trajan's reign was Ignatius, a successor of Peter, believed to have been fed to wild beasts. Under his successor's reign, many Christians were put to death on Mount Ararat, where a mockery of Jesus being crucified took place, and the victims would be crowned with thorns and have their sides pierced with a sword while hanging them from a cross. Pure satanic. When Marcus Aurelius took to the throne, the fourth wave took things to new heights. Christians would be whipped with a flagrum until their sinews and bones were laid bare. Some would, after their scourging, be crushed by giant weights descending slowly onto their victims, crushing them to death. Beheading rose up again in prominence, where Christians were decapitated for professing their faith. Later, many Christians were gathered into colosseums, where beasts, including lions and dogs and other wild animals such as bears, were set loose in the midst of savage crowds chanting the death of their victims. The fifth period of persecution commenced in the reign of Severus, where many famous Christian teachers such as Origen, Irenaeus, the Bishop of Leon, and many other senior bishops were either burnt or beheaded. Soon the scourge of burning, beheading, and crucifying Christians extended into northern Africa, where vast numbers of Christians were slaughtered on a daily basis. The sixth period of persecution commenced during the reign of Maximinius, from 235 to 237, where many Christians were slain without a valid trial, with their dead, naked bodies placed in heaps and subsequently dumped into mass graves. In the reign of Decius, the seventh period of Christian persecution emerged as enemies of the gospel caused divisions, and Decius strove to eliminate Christianity from the shores of the Roman Empire. He staged trials, public beheading ceremonies, emboldened torturing techniques, burning people alive, and the scourging of Christians, which resulted in an innumerable number of martyrs. Now it is during the reign of Valerian, the eighth period of intense persecution, that once again Christians were killed in various barbaric ways. The Bishop of Toulouse, Saturninus, upon refusing to sacrifice to idols, had his feet fastened to the tail of a bull, and after enraging it, the animal was set loose to run down the stairs of a temple, killing the bishop. Christians faced cruel death, and many voluntarily jumped into burning lime pits. The torture stepped up once again when many were mauled by wild animals in Roman arenas. A few years later, in 274 AD, Aurelian took to the throne, and martyrdom reared its ugly head once again. It is only due to his assassination that this period was less intense than the former periods. Make no mistake that during this time, the life of Christian believers was an absolute misery. When Emperor Diocletian was enthroned in 284 AD, he appointed two co-emperors who continued the last phase of Christian persecution on a mass scale. Entire cities such as Phrygia was set alight with all its inhabitants burnt alive, and it was all due to their Christian heritage. When governors objected, they stopped the mass killing and mutilated Christian victims in ways that are even nowadays unimaginable and not worthy of repeating. The age of open slaughter and persecution of Christians came to an official end in 313 AD, bringing the 10 periods of Christian persecution to an abrupt end.
Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes won't be harmed by the second death.
Now the Christians who were representing Smyrna are not promised protection, but rather are encouraged that should they remain faithful until death, they will receive the crown of life and will not be harmed by the second death. Embedded between the condition and the promises are the words, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the 7 churches." Now listen carefully. This expresses not only its universal application to all believers of all ages, but emphasizes that there are significant spiritual depths revealed in each message. At the core is that this illustrates that aligning with Jesus Christ is not a once-off decision, but a lifelong commitment that requires a conscious decision to remain in the faith no matter what obstacles are experienced. The crown of life is recorded in the book of James and given to those that endure temptation. We find this in James 1 verse 12. Naturally, those who face death for their belief in Christ are tempted to recant of their faith and receive the same reward for enduring. This crown, the crown of life, is a special reward, and although symbolic, it describes a particular aspect of glory reserved for those who overcome temptation and who remain faithful even until death. Now we read that they won't be hurt by the second death. The second death is actually the dishonor of the wicked, who ultimately, towards the very end of Revelation, are cast into the eternal lake of fire. Hordes of people are en route there, and according to Revelation, are those whose names are not written in the book of life. Concerning the church age, all 7 of these churches existed in modern-day Turkey, and all received a nickname. Smyrna, being commended for their faithfulness, even unto death, received the nickname of the persecuted church, and is seen as representative of all those persecuted for their faith. While we don't know the exact demise of the actual Smyrnian church, it was ultimately overcome by its prophetic execution. As mentioned before, today it is known as Izmir in the Islamic world. Following those that backslide, symbolically represented by the Church of Ephesus, a period of persecution erupted throughout the world, which is reflected by the major trait experienced by the persecuted church of Smyrna. Historically, Christians were persecuted from 64 AD, overlapping with the backsliding age, and continued until 313 AD, where Constantine brought the official persecution of Christians to an abrupt end with the Edict of Milan. As you can see, the predictive nature of these prophecies correlate with historic timeframes. That is only 2 churches, but things are still about to take a turn for the worst. Until next time, Maranatha.